You, Anna, and hello, everybody. I'm glad some of you are back, and I'm glad some of you who weren't here last time were able to join us this time. And I'm aware from what occurred in the last session that a lot of folks only have an hour and they started dropping off. So I'll try to put the most important stuff in the first part, but we will be going 90 minutes. My name is Chuck Pratt. I am a shop of one. I've been consulting in the UW system for almost 20 years. What we're going to be talking about today is pulling some stuff from a class I teach for the University of Washington called Working Smarter. And as a review, we last time talked about the world is VUCA, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and most of us are receiving more emails in a day than we can possibly process. The pace of change just seems to get going faster. Technology continues to advance, and so it's a complex world we live in, and that is acknowledging that it was that way on 1 March 2020. Since about that time, things have gotten even more complex. And so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show a PowerPoint file, but it's something that you have as part of your handout. And one of the things that we talked about is that if life is complicated and we're busy, then it's helpful to have some frameworks to help structure things for us, help us manage and navigate all that complexity. And so one of those frameworks that I find to be helpful is something called the Focus Energy Matrix. I discovered it in a Harvard Business Review article called Beware the Busy Manager. And the folks that are using this framework find that it's helpful in helping folks do a better job of managing their day. So in this model, we've got two axes, focus and energy. You can be high or low in focus, high or low in energy. And the research included, and it's kind of the gold standard for research of this kind, behavioral observation. So people followed managers around all day long while they were doing the work that they normally do. And from that, we get the percentages here, and that the smallest group of folks were both high in energy and high in focus. Yeah, 10%. 10% of managers are purposeful. The largest category is the distracted category. 4 out of 10 managers are distracted. It means they got high energy, but they lack focus. So they may be busy running around creating more messes than they're fixing. Going over to the procrastination side, this is your low energy, low focus, and then the disengaged folks, and there may be some burnout included in that particular category. And I am predicting that when COVID finally is behind us, and who knows when that might be, that folks in healthcare are going to be suffering a lot of burnout. There are going to be people changing jobs, probably people getting ill, because when you're under a lot of stress, it tends to cause physical illnesses downstream. So this is a way of thinking about things. And what we talked about last week was the energy part of this. And this week we're going to be, or 3 weeks ago, and this week or today we're going to be talking about the focus part of it. But just to remind, what we talked about was the concept of ultradian rhythms, that you need to be changing pace, doing something with a break in between in about 90 to 120 minute cycles during the day, paying attention to when you're at your best and scheduling your toughest work there. A 5-minute walk outdoors, especially around the block or whatever, can be a great energizer. And this notion is based on that there's a finite amount of time for everybody each day, but energy is a renewable resource. And so if you're trying to manage that, don't over caffeinate yourself. Don't try to, if you're locked in on something, say, I really need to get this done, and I'm going to power through, meaning I'm going to work past that 90 to 120 minute cycle. Mindfulness is always recommended. Diaphragmatic yoga or belly breathing is helpful. The book, The Power of Full Engagement, more broadly lays out this program of trying to manage your energy, not your time. And the Energy Project, which is a resource link in the handout that you have, is the folks behind all this. Getting 8 hours sleep a night, making sure we're exercising and maintaining hydration, all those kinds of things all make a difference. All right, so today we want to talk about increasing focus, and what we're going to cover is some stuff around multitasking, the problem with distractions, using trade-off conversations, and we talked a little bit about that last time, saying no gracefully. We did cover flow last time, so we won't be doing that today. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to go to your workbook, and if you want to share the screen, that would be fine, Anna. And we're taking a look at the page on the myth of multitasking, which is on page 11 in the document. So Stanford University has a study that says that, and first of all, multitasking is when we're trying to divide our attention between two things. And that's not the same thing as maybe if you're a kinesthetic person, you actually can concentrate better if you're moving. So moving wouldn't necessarily be part of multitasking. My great example for multitasking is trying to watch a football game on TV. My favorite team, I'm watching the game, but the time in between plays is kind of slow and boring. So I start reading a book or a magazine or something. And then at the end of the game, I feel like I haven't really paid that much attention to the book, and I really haven't enjoyed or watched the game like I would have liked to. And somehow I can't get those guys to speed their plays up and get them moving faster. So that's just a real basic example. And Stanford University had people identify whether they thought they were good multitaskers or not, and then they tested them. And one of the interesting findings out of that research is the more likely you are to say you are a multitasker, actually you do it more poorly. And the folks that quickly say I'm not a multitasker actually scored better. If you are multitasking, there was a study of men by the University of London, you have a drop in 15 IQ points, which drops you down to the level of an 8-year-old child. So multitasking has you behaving like an 8-year-old child. There's another study that said that multitasking causes you to act as if you're mildly sleep impaired. Another one, Debbie Grace is saying, isn't it really multi-thinking? Yeah, if you're trying to get your brain concentrating on two different things, that's kind of a problematic thing. Another study found that people's performance matched that of people who were mildly intoxicated. So these are all, I think, compelling studies that tell us that even though we are tempted to do multitasking because it feels like we can get, two things done at once, and that makes us more efficient and effective, what you're really doing is you're sub-optimizing your performance on two different things. Did they study women? I don't know. I'm sure they must have done, but nothing that I've got here listed. Is your thought, Holly, that women's brains are different enough that they can multitask?
No, my thought was, well, I'm sure it's the same, but it's always nice to know. I know that in studies that sometimes there is a difference between the performance of men and women. I'm sure, yeah. But I think in this case it might be the same. But anyway.
Well, there is some studies that that women have got more cross brain connections and things, but I don't know whether that would make things easier or less easy.
It would just be interesting because I know so many studies have only been done on men, and then when they finally do bring women into the picture, it's a little bit different, but that's okay. This is good.
All right. Harvard University study was about, mistakes being made and actually a 40% drop in productivity. So all this is to kind of convince you that, by gosh, maybe I should not engage in multitasking and I might end up being more productive. Now, the note at the bottom there, multitasking can feel good because it gives our brain a jolt of dopamine. So, you know, every time we check our phone or check Facebook, or every time we check email, we're trying to get a dopamine lift, and we can get kind of addicted to that sort of stuff. This statement here says, just don't confuse getting that jolt of dopamine with being productive, because they're not the same thing. All right. So I'd like to apply this information on the next page, and I'm going to ask you guys to do a reflective activity. And if you could kind of scroll to those, Anna. So think about all the ways that you are multitasking and record what those are here. How do you see that, the fact that you're multitasking, how does it impacting your life? How could you change things? What are some ways you could avoid multitasking? And that's kind of applying the information here. With so few cameras turned on, it's hard to tell whether folks are still reflecting or not. So how about give me a thumbs up symbol if you still need more time on the reflective piece. Okay, I'm seeing a couple thumbs, so I'll give you a few more minutes. All right, if you're still working, you can ignore me and continue to do the reflective piece for yourself. For those of you that are done, any comments, observations, insights that you'd like to comment on?
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can, Megan.
Okay, great. Thank you. I thought I had turned my video back on and then it was still off. Yeah, I have a job that actually I realize now that actually requires me to multitask, and there isn't any way to get around that particular part of my job. But I just have to be very clever. But I kind of tried to give this up a long time ago, and because I found that I get confused and stressed out when I'm trying to do more than one thing at one time. I don't do it well, except I can type and talk at the same time. but only barely. And so I try to avoid it, but I was thinking of some things that could be done, if you're in a situation where you aren't forced to, but you just want, it just seems like the right thing to do. And one thing is to delegate some of that extra work that you feel like you have to get done out to somebody else. And also making timelines and sticking to them and planning your activities really carefully so that you can make sure that you don't have to overlap anything.
Okay. So you thought about some ways if you had more control over your day that you could limit your multitasking.
Yes, I do limit it. This is one thing I do 4 times a month that I have to, because I have to watch students and watch a text with proctors and send them, listen to what they're asking me for. I'm a chief proctor for online exams, and so in that case, I must do multiple tasks as part of that job, and it's hard. So I avoid multitasking when I can. But I do think that that there are some of those ways you can kind of get around it.
Yeah. So in my classes, I frequently hear from people whose job is just such that they're frequently trying to do a bunch of different things at once, always interruptible by other people's needs and things like that. So one of the things we can do is to, if you're in a role like that, is ask for someone to come in and sit at your desk for an hour to give yourself a break from all that, and you can go off and maybe focus on something else that needs to be done. Anybody else with a comment?
Sure. I don't know if this, well, so first of all, I definitely recognize that multitasking doesn't work very well for me. And it's like, I'll be trying to do 2 things and I'll recognize that I've like totally missed something. But I don't know if this is strictly multitasking, but one of the things I thought of as we were doing this thought exercise was that sometimes when I'm stressed about something, or if I'm worried about something, it will like, and I'm doing something, it'll take my focus away and I'll think about that. And like, I'm not really sure. I mean, I can think of some ways to avoid that, like figuring out how to not stress about things. But like, that was sort of it's a multitask because it does take my brain away from what I'm doing. And then I recognize that I'm not doing either one of them very well. Like one of the things, like I go for a walk and I listen to a podcast, and I often listen to podcasts that aren't just fluff. That's something I want to learn. And if I'm worried about something, I'll catch myself like the last 5 minutes I've been thinking about this thing I'm worried about instead of listening to the podcast, and I have to back up. And anyway,
so you have proof that multitasking doesn't work, and if it's something you really want to concentrate on, you gotta pick a time when you're not, you don't have your mind distracted by things.
I was thinking about this, and I think that we don't use the out of office enough so that we can say to people, like when we're attending something like this, I'm presently at a seminar, I will respond to your email when I'm done, so that you're giving other people, you're telling people, and you're telling yourself, this is my time to learn, or this is my time to write a proposal.
Yes, and particularly, harkening back to the last meeting that we had where we talked about, if you become aware that there's a certain time of the day when you have your best ability to concentrate and focus, then schedule that tough work for that time frame, and you've got to put some boundaries around that and tell people, my door is normally open except from 1 to 2:30. Unless somebody's it's an emergency, I'd rather not be interrupted. And I think it's okay to start drawing those kind of boundaries. But as in some of the comments in the chat room, there are cultural expectations about work and that sort of stuff. Like we talked about the American culture, supporting workaholism and everybody really being busy and people, working so hard, they're giving back vacation time and all that kind of stuff. So I think, Holly, yes, you need to create some boundaries for yourself to protect that time frame.
So I'd like to share just in my own experience, like how it doesn't relate to work, is that I think in my work life, I've gotten so good at mastering multitasking, at performing at such a high level and doing a bunch of things at once that I almost can't isolate doing one task and focusing on one thing. And so, yeah, it's almost this thing of like, well, that's what I'm conditioned to do. I've been conditioned to do that. And so when I have like idle time, I kind of need to be doing a multitude of things, or else I'm a little bored.
Okay. And so when you're multitasking, you feel like you are productive and efficient.
For the most part, and I'll give an example. I mean, I was with a couple of my girlfriends this weekend, and we were talking, having girl chat, watching a movie, and at the same time, I'm like ordering a rug and like curtains from Amazon, but I'm like totally engaged in the conversation and present. But yeah, like, but I think when you're just conditioned to do that, and my work life has been the main driving force behind that. It's how I've been performing in other arenas. But what I'd like to do is undo that so that I can, be more present to just taking care of one task at a time.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were here last week, but we chatted about mindfulness meditation can help us with that focus piece and being able to kind of, limit yourself to just one kind of a thing. Okay, I'm going to look through the chat here. I use multitasking to catch up, hard to work both on catch up and good habits at the same time. It's kind of like trying to change the tire on the car when you're driving down the road at 55 miles an hour. Difficult balance when part of your job is to be responsive. Yep. And that's where, drawing some boundaries and see if you can get somebody to relieve you on that those responsive times. Heather, I think it's like being in a loop. I'm chasing my tail, not getting anything done. When I realize this, I stop myself and force myself to focus. So when you have that awareness, you're able to make that transition. That's great. Sean said, I can't type and talk at the same time, and I'm in the same place as he is. Got some dittos, it looks like. Multitasking is held up as a job requirement or an excellent skill set. Oftentimes when I'm in my workshops talking about this multitasking, there's a lot of pushback from people because they have a hard time believing the research that says that most of us are not able to be productive when our brain is trying to concentrate on more than one thing at a time. And your brain really only has two potential channels. So the maximum you could be working on is two things at a time for most folks. I can't easily remember what I did, or my work becomes sloppy when I'm not focused. So there's that sub-optimizing kind of piece. Setting time limits, agree with feeling. So there's some validation of the chasing your tail concept. I've always been bad about checking emails during meetings. That's only become worse with constant Zoom meetings. I may try turning off the visual email notification. We're going to talk about the email notifications, in just a moment. So does mindfulness practice help with one-pointed attention and building power to resist multitasking? I think so. I've been a steady meditator for over a decade now, and I think my powers of concentration have been improved because of that. So Betsy does the marking out of office. So she's kind of saying she takes advantage of that. Error rate with multitasking. Tony, could you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for there?
I just am wondering if there have been studies or research done on how many more errors people make when they do all this multitasking and they're trying to complete.
So,
I notice at home when I try to do laundry and cook and answer the phone, I wind up burning food and that kind of thing. So just kind of wondering if there is some information about that.
I'm sure there is, Tony. I'm not, I haven't seen any of it, but it might be interesting to go. We have this thing called search engines now, so I may go take a peek at that. All right, continuing through chat. Yep. So another comment on the work cultural expectations. I find it helpful to concentrate in Zoom meetings by taking handwritten notes, from Stephanie. That might be a clue that you're a kinesthetic style learner, because actually doing a little bit of movement can increase people's ability to focus. I know when I'm doing a crucial conversation on the phone, I like to walk with my phone. It seems like I can focus on the conversation better. All right, maybe asking people to limit their distractions if they're interacting with you. The chat window is a distraction, yeah. Particularly if you're trying to run a workshop and there's a lot of messages, like there's already 22, I'm way behind. So scanning quicker.
I can keep an eye out for questions too, Chuck, if you want to. We
Right,
can have the chat just kind of be for people who feel like discussing in chat. And then if there's questions, I can pose them for you too.
All right, so moving to the next page in the handout, there's something that I'm calling electronic deficit disorder. It's a EDD. It's something that I kind of made up back in 1997 when I was working with Fidelity Investments. And they had just gotten, Blackberries were real popular back then. They were just catching on. And it was not uncommon for you to be talking to one of Fidelity's executives, and they would get their Blackberry would go off. They called them crackberries, and because of that dopamine piece. And they would just stop talking to you and just look down and start doing the texting thing, which to me at the time felt rude, and I guess it still does feel rude. I haven't changed on that. And so distraction is a problem, because if you're at your peak level of concentration, your brain is really locked in on something, and you get a distraction, it takes your brain 15 minutes to come back to that same level of concentration. And there's also a piece of research that suggests that we have most of us, about an hour and a half of heavy concentration ability each day. So, if you're using it and then getting distracted and then trying to get back to it and use it, it doesn't work out. It kind of may be frittering it all away. So the exercise here is to think about, when are your powers of concentration at their peak? Is there a way for you to modify your workday to do that in the best way possible? List all of your daily distractions. And as you think of daily distractions, think about the ghosting, telling you you've got a new email in, or the little email symbol, or chimes, rings, bells, dings, all that stuff that is letting you know things are going on. I was doing a coaching appointment yesterday with an individual who, I guess their phone or email, it was just constant. It was like a little Zen ping, 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 and it was just going constantly. It was distracting me. I kept hoping that she would kind of damp the thing down. So think about the distractions and what can you do to limit distractions? How can you draw some boundaries around that so that when you are focused, you don't lose that brain power or that brain concentration?
One thing that Oops. Oh, sorry. Are we doing this reflectively?
Yeah, I didn't explicitly state that, so it's my fault for not being better on the instructions. Yeah, this is kind of a reflective piece, and then we'll process it out if you want to hold your thought, Kelsey. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm. All right, if you would do the thumbs up gesture if you need more time on the reflection. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so let's go ahead and Kelsey, you can jump in now, and anybody else, if you have a comment or a thought that kind of arose out of the reflexive piece, please speak up.
Thank you. I was still thinking of the last question about avoiding multitasking or limiting distractions, and then it came up again while we were listing distractions. A big one for me is my home is a mess. That's something I've struggled with for a long time. There's just a lot of visual clutter. I'm trying to work on it, but I was able to have more of a controlled space at work and keep things organized in that setting. And even though we've been remote for almost a year, I still struggle with just loose papers and the stuff of work in my small apartment. And then I look at something and I'm like, oh, that reminds me. And then I want to go do that thing, but I'm like, oh, it's work time. And like, but then I feel like I never have time to do life stuff or chores, or I'm trying to like keep track of, am I working 8 hours? Or, and part of the thing about like, I'm actually a night owl and I get my best work done at night, but I'm in a union position and it's important to start and end on time. So I don't know what to do.
Anybody have any thoughts? And maybe somebody that's had some of the clutter and has figured it out, or?
I think you can still do your work at night, but just don't hit send on anything. You know, have all your drafts ready to go and then send them all later. You know, do the work, but don't share it with anyone. But that's not respecting the union rules, but it helps you work.
You can actually schedule your email to go out at a certain time. I don't know if you use the Gmail, the G Suite email, but that's an option.
Do you know if Outlook does that? Can you schedule emails in Outlook?
Outlook does.
Awesome. I'll Google it. Thank you.
Maybe we can have a group demo.
You just have to be careful, because the one time I did that, when the person finally received the message, it said it was sent at 11:30 at night, which totally defeated the purpose.
I have not been successful with the delay send. Maybe because I was under the Exchange server, or I don't know. You have to be connected to the server. You can get some tech issues.
There are people in your organization that know these programs and can talk to you about them. It's just a matter of locating the resource. It's each different part of the U has got a little different way it's set up, but.
One thing that I found helpful, Kelsey, is that I had to reposition my desk. And I guess, you know, when you live with multiple people, you only have so much control over this, so that I'm not like, I'm looking out a window, which that can be distracting, but at least I'm not looking at other things in my home. So when people walk by, I don't see it, and it doesn't, I don't focus on it, things like that. If you have any control in that area, you could find that helpful. And yeah, I see Eliza, your hand is up.
Yes, Eliza, would you? Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to respond to these questions. I think for me, my concentration is better in the morning. And for that reason, I normally reserve my research, the most important of my work, to be the morning time. And in terms of distraction, I think 2 types of distraction for me. One is internal, the other is external. For internal, I think rumination, that part, sometimes I just have some things going on and I'm talking to myself, quite a little bit. So basically, so far my coping strategy for that is writing down my thought process, just as what I did this morning. I write down 1 whole page. And but I'm still looking for ideas to deal with rumination. I'm not sure it's just me or it's a pretty common issue. I think that is internal distraction that can be especially obvious when I have something that's unresolved and I just cannot control it, or some really outstanding issue. For external distraction, probably number 1 is the cell phone. So I turn off notification for most apps on my phone. But still, I find each morning I have a tendency to pick up my phone as the first thing to do. So I make it almost my New Year resolution. I just put a note in front of my computer and telling myself, this is the thing I will stop doing this year. So I think so far I have made good progress on this one. But I still have that tendency. I really need to control myself. Yeah, but I don't know why cell phone is so appealing. Yeah.
So the notion of dopamine, Eliza, is your body or your brain releases dopamine as an anticipatory chemical. And in evolutionary biology, when your pre-modern ancestor was sitting on a rock and looks over there and sees some red berries, dopamine was the signal to get up and go over there and say, those look sweet, let me try one. So it moves you towards things, and then you get a little, a dopamine rush. And so we have too many things in our lives now. I mean, I tell the story, I'm old enough that, you used to only get snail mail. There was no such thing as email, and mail came once a day, and you went down to the post office box, kind of with that dopamine thing and saying, oh, I wonder who I got a mail from. And in fact, you actually maybe got mail from relatives instead of just bills and advertisements. But now with email, you get ding, ding, ding all day long. You've got the potential for a dopamine rush on checking all those things. There's this, I wonder what, I heard that ding, I wonder what it might be. It could be something really good. And oftentimes it's not. Somebody put a note in, Eliza, that meditation helped them with the rumination piece. I was going to recommend dumping your rumination into writing. What I would add to that is set a timer for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. But start writing and then symbolically close the book and set it aside, letting yourself know that you're done, kind of going over and over that particular thing. So limit the time on it as well as putting it into writing.
Okay, sure. So just regarding the dopamine, you're saying we are naturally curious about what's going on, so we just wanted to check the phone.
I would say as a survival mechanism in our pre-modern ancestors, dopamine got us moving towards things that would help us survive. But like many things that helped us back in those days survive, in a modern society may not necessarily be our best friend, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Okay, anybody else with a comment on the distractions?
Distractions. Yeah, I had a comment, something that that Eliza said really set something off in my mind. And I don't know if it really relates directly to the distractions, but it relates to the powers of concentration peak. And that is, I just realized that my concentration power time is different. Peak time is different than my creative peak time. I'm a creative person. And that just, I don't know, that just struck me. And I thought it was important.
Good. Well, so if you're aware of two different productive periods, a place where you're really focused and a place where you're creative, and when you're at your best, as long as they don't overlap with each other, that would be a bummer. But if they are at separate times, then that gives you more guidance on, to the degree that you can, structure your day.
Look, I thought I would weigh in on the night owl piece because I have struggled with that all my life. I love to do my work late at night. I used to write papers, until the wee hours in the morning, and it was totally fine for me. But obviously that doesn't work for my lifestyle anymore. And so one of the things I've done is started creating a really detailed list the night before of all the things I want to get done the next day. So when I'm blurry-eyed in the morning and drinking my coffee, it's all right there ready for me to tackle. Because I find that that's when I feel most overwhelmed, when I'm staring at my computer and I have all these things to do and emails to answer. So I just kind of start my day off knowing what's expected of me, and that list comes the night before. So, and I think somebody mentioned in there having a little notebook next to their computer. So as projects come up and I'm trying to do some of the deep work and I get the ping, I can just jot that down. So. Yeah,
the definitive book, Kathleen, on organizing your day, is called Getting Things Done. And it's so famous that it's referred to as GTD in the websites. I think David Allen is the author, Getting Things Done. And his method takes advantage of something that's true about your brain. And that is, if your brain doesn't think you've got a plan for something, it's going to keep nagging you. So you yourself are going to have distracting thoughts. And so what David Allen says, get everything out of your head and onto paper. So that technique of the night before, putting all that stuff down, your brain says, you've got a plan and I don't need to keep nagging you. So what I do, because I use a Kanban board for managing my workflow, every time I have a thought about something I need to do, I put it down on a piece of paper, because until you get it recorded, the brain's going to keep nagging you. Those are going to be distracting and de-energizing kinds of thoughts. So, great. Thank you. Anybody else with a comment? I'm going to, Anna, I'm going to take over this. Somebody speaking, or was that background noise?
I think it was accidental unmute.
Okay.
Kanban board is mind blowing.
In a good way or a
I
bad?
love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a fabulous way. Thank
the in the full version of this course, we teach Kanban. If you've used Trello, you've used it before. Some people already are using a Kanban board. I find it's especially helpful to people who are more visual or kinesthetic. It's because a to-do list is kind of static, but having a Kanban board where you're moving stuff around is appealing to some personality styles, I think, more so than a static list. All right, I'm gonna take over the screen, Anna, and I'm gonna bring up a document. All right, so I sent you a copy of this, Anna. If you would post it in the chat so everybody can have a copy for themselves at some point, I would appreciate that. Trade-off conversations. We have alluded to them a little bit, but as we think about trying to manage our day, structure our day, and drawing boundaries, we need to learn to start letting people know that we're overloaded. We have too much work. And people are really reluctant to do that. They're reluctant to, because we have this culture that says you're supposed to get everything done. And if I'm your boss and I give you work and you do it, then I'm rewarded and I'm going to give you more work. And I'm going to keep giving you work because you seem to keep getting it done. And I may not be aware that you're working overtime, putting in, 9, 10, 11, 12-hour days in order to get that work done. And if that's happening to you, you're really kind of colluding with your boss to keep you overworked. And I know when I was a boss, I never really wanted anybody to be, putting in overtime or extra time, taking work home, working on the weekends and those kinds of things. But if you don't know, then you can't help them manage that. So a trade-off conversation is where we let people know that we've got enough on our plate, and you don't tell your boss, I'm not going to do that, but you say to your boss, here are the top 3 things you've got me working on. Where does this new thing fit? Is it my number 1 priority? And if so, then which one of these 3 things would you like me to put on the back burner? So it's not that you're not telling them you're not going to do the work. You're just saying, I can only get so much work done. What's the most important thing? So having the boss's priorities helps you with your focus, because then you know what the priorities are. And it also, those trade-off conversations begin to signal back to the boss that I didn't know you had so many different things going on right now. Another example of a trade-off conversation, if they come to you and they give you something that they want done, how soon do you want this done? And if they say, well, it'd be really nice to have it done now. Okay, is it more important than what I'm working on right now? Well, maybe it isn't. So that feedback to them that you need their help to help you concentrate on the most important things. And on page 2 of this document, it just has a real quick process on how to have a trade-off conversation. So identify for yourself what all the priorities are, and then what are the most important ones, so that you can lay that out to your boss, and then talk about step 3 is how you're going to get all those things done, and then identify the impact this is going to have on the lower priority items. if I'm working on these things, that means I'm not going to be able to get to this until, for another month, or is that okay? If it's not okay, then either the priority needs to be upped or they need to find somebody else, some other resource to do that kind of work. So this gives you a nice little process flow to have those kind of conversations. And what I'd like you to do is reflect for a moment on where could you start to work in some trade-off conversations with your boss. Think about your workload right now and what that conversation might look like. Any questions or comments on the task? So plan out or visualize a trade-off conversation.
This assumes you have an organized boss.
Well, if you don't, these kinds of conversations might make them aware that they've not done a good job of setting priorities, and your questions may actually make them do a better job of focus, and maybe if they're energetic, move them into that top 10% of productive people. If you would use the electronic thumbs up signal, let me know if you still need more time on this exercise. Not seeing any, so any insights, comments, questions?
Hi, I have something about this. Is a lot of times what helps me with my boss is I actually, especially now that we're not in the same place, I send him at least weekly sort of a bulleted points of all the stuff that he thinks I should be doing, that I know I should be working on, what he has to work on. And I think it's a really good way of him seeing right away how much work I'm actually having to do and the pieces and the responsibilities and stuff. And then we will circle back and meet and kind of go through that. And if I, in that conversation, some of those priorities will have switched, or I can say, these people are not being very responsive to me to move this thing forward. And so, he ends up then, just an awareness. Sometimes the conversation is just here's everything I'm doing. And that sometimes really sort of focuses them. I'm like, wow, that's really an awful lot I've given you to do. So when I have something else, I might sort of be mindful about that and he'll say, here's this other thing I really need you to do, but maybe this other thing, just, it can wait. And so I think that's been very helpful, because then we both kind of know what's going on. And if something is missing, it's very obvious. Oh, what about this thing? That kind of stuff.
Good. So you don't use exactly a trade-off conversation, but a weekly getting on the same page with your boss about.
Yeah, and the trade-off conversation can fall out of that. It doesn't. And then that way nobody feels I think maybe a little ambushed or a little like, oh, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So.
Okay. Anybody else with a thought or comment? And the other part of this is when we're thinking about drawing boundaries to protect ourselves with our workload, is if, in these classes, people will complain, oh, my boss sends me emails at 10 o'clock at night. Most bosses, if you ask them, they're just being productive at that time themselves, and they're not necessarily looking for a response. But beginning to let folks know that, I don't respond to emails after 5 p.m. or, whatever that time frame is. Just letting folks know, it'll be the first thing that I address the next day, or those kinds of things. So making clear, what your boundaries are about when you're available and when you're not available is another helpful piece of this. All right, in that same document with the trade-off conversations, there's a concept called noise canceling. And I can't remember if I mentioned Sean Achor last time, but Sean Achor is one of these guys that says that social science and psychological research has a lot to tell us that would be helpful to us, but most people don't know about it because it's in a research article someplace, and only about 6 people read journal articles. So he's an expert at going out and finding things and bringing them back in mainstream books, helping us. So he's got a book called Before Happiness. And in the book, he is talking about, the main point is that positive intelligence seems to be more predictive of success in life than even emotional or social intelligence. And positive intelligence is kind of this concept that if I believe I can get something done, then I'm more likely to engage in the behaviors that end up making that happen. And if I believe I can't, then I don't bother trying. And so there's an element of self-fulfilling prophecy. But in the book, he talks about ways that you can, increase your positive intelligence, be more effective, get more things done. And one of the little things I thought was very useful in the class is he talks about, or in the book is talking about noise canceling. He says there's a lot of noise in our environment, the TV, the email, the Facebook, all kinds of things that are distracting us from noticing what's important. And so noise canceling is this notion that if you could just achieve a 5% reduction in the noise in your life, your ability to concentrate on your priorities and focus would be improved. So he says that thinking about all the information that you're paying attention to, he's got 4 criteria for determining whether something is noise, if information is noise. And so the first is it, and somebody in my last class said that it works better for them if they flip it around, but if information is unusable, then that's noise. And the example he uses is, let's say there's a big hurricane that just hit Florida, and the news is on, and they're showing pictures of all these houses that are scattered all over the place or washed away at the beach or whatever. It's fascinating to watch all that stuff, but what are you going to do with that kind of information other than maybe stress you out, particularly if you live also on the coast? So is it unusable? Then don't pay attention to it. Is it untimely? So you're not going to be using this information soon, and it could change by the time you do use it. And one of the David Allen getting things done techniques he talks about is having some place to put information that you're going to need later. And in Outlook, I've got a file, a special file where, let's say I've got my car company sends me a 10% off coupon for maintenance. I don't need maintenance right now, but let me go put that in that folder. And then I know where those things that may have a future need are. So if it's not information you need right now, it's noise. Is it hypothetical? Is it based on what somebody believes could be instead of what is? And right now there's a whole lot of speculation about what could be and what is, in terms of pandemic and things going back to norm. But mostly it's just all hypothetical. What we fear may happen rather than, anybody having any really good insight that it is going to happen. And then anything that distracts you from your goals, which is a pretty big category. I'm thinking, geez, I've got Mahjong on my computer. Does that distract me from getting things done? Yeah, it probably does. It only takes about 3 or 4 minutes to play a game, and I limit myself to one. So there's some rationalization stuff, but I don't load up any longer, games that will take up more of my time. So that's a place where I'm kind of drawing the line. So thinking about information, what I'd like you to do is record at least one example for yourself of information that you get that is unusable, untimely, hypothetical, or distracting. So apply his 4 criteria and see if you can find at least one thing in your life that can be canceled. All right, could you give me a thumbs up in the window there if you're still needing more time to identify 4 different noises that you could cancel? Not seeing any, so just a general question to the group. Any thoughts, comments, questions, insights gained from this reflection?
What I'm finding is that there are a lot of informational emails that don't apply to me that I get. I'm on so many different email lists, and some of them, there are things that go out to all UW personnel, all college personnel, all department personnel, and once in a while there's a nugget of information, but there are also all these system notifications that I get based on my authorization level that don't apply to me, that I don't need. And they're very distracting and they pile up.
Well, there are in Outlook, there is ways to put up some rules for, certain people, emails from certain people can go into an important folder so that you can screen it first, or certain, things that people, you can block some things or put things into junk. So that's one possibility, is to use the Outlook to try to measure, to manage that for yourself a little bit. You know, to I think a great extent, most of us are practicing triage with email. We're looking at the bold-faced title in the inbox, and we're trying to make a decision whether I'm even going to open that one or not. And you know, an activity might be to take a look at all the emails you get on a recurring basis and ask yourself, do I really need those? Can I go to people and have them remove me from the list for those things? But I mean, it's just a fact of life that most people are getting more emails than they have the capacity to process in a day. And you know, so I say, if you assume that just because you hit the send button that it actually pops out onto somebody's desktop, you might want to question whether that's so or not. And just because it pops up on their desktop, if you assume that they're actually going to open it, then, you know, I think you need to question that. And if they actually read it, you know, open it up and do they actually read it? And if they actually read it, do they pay attention to all of it? You know, those are all things that I think are in doubt. I've got a good friend, I love him to death, but if I've got 4 questions to ask him, I don't put 4 questions in an email because he never does anything more than answer the first one. I hate to do it, but I send him 4 emails, 1 with each question. Or I say, you know what, I really only need to ask him 3 and jettison the last one. So there are ways to manage email better, but you know, it's a burden for everybody. I think I'm self-employed, thank goodness, so I don't have a lot of, you know, those informational kinds of emails that you get when you're in a large system like you folks are in. So you have my empathy on that. Anybody else with ideas about managing email?
Sorry, no, not about managing email. I would just in the chat, I would, of course, second unroll.me is really helpful. And I was a UW student and then worked elsewhere for many years. And when I came back, I was on like 10,000 lists. And so my boss was like, I want you to take the first like 2 days and just unsubscribe from everything. So because they don't give you a new UWNet ID. I was my student email as my work email. So I was grateful for that because it really did take that much time because I had signed every petition I'd ever, you know, been put in front of me. I was really struggling with the hypothetical one because so much of, especially now in the pandemic, but even before that, it's like we have to plan for different scenarios and, you know, like, will we have this many students? Will we be able to run the program? What's our budget? Blah, blah, blah. And now it's really not knowing, you know, if and when we'll be back in person. So I guess I had a hard time coming up with an example in a work situation because that's part of what I do is to plan.
Certainly, if you're a planning person, you have to pay attention. You have to have something to base some assumptions to base your planning on, and that's going to be you know, maybe some hypotheticals. So I'm not saying cut all the hypotheticals out of your life, but use these 4 criteria to screen information that you're tuning into, and I think maybe is that something I can cancel and limit the noise in my life, so that I have more time to concentrate on the things that are important. Any other questions or comments around the noise canceling piece? Was everyone pretty much able to find 4 examples? All right, on the next page, actually, I'm going to change the share back to the original document. And I want to talk a little bit about willpower. We last time we were together, I mentioned this, that it's all great to be thinking about you know, focus and energy, but all of this is in the context of we have to be willing to do what we need to do in order to make things happen, and that's willpower or impulse control. And there's been, since about the late 80s, there's been an expanding body of research around this notion of willpower. And in Roy Baumeister's book, there's this quote: when psychologists isolate the personal qualities that predict positive outcomes in life, they consistently find two traits: intelligence and self-control. And of course, we know now that intelligence is a bunch of different kinds of things. And that most major problems, both personal and social, center on a failure of self-control. So in the book, they talk about, they did a study with 200 Germans, and they gave them a beeper, and the beeper would go off, and every time it went off, they were to record what was going on for them. And they discovered that human beings spend about a quarter of their waking hours, which is about 4 hours a day for most of us. Quarter of our day, 4 hours a day, is spent denying some kind of desire, whether it's relaxation, sleep, food, you know, the list goes on. There's lots of things that we are thinking about and craving. So willpower is in the brain, it's circuitry in the brain, it's tied to decision making. So the notion of decision fatigue is a real thing. And when we use it, we deplete it. And you only have a finite amount of willpower each day. So, you know, the classic of a group of people get together, they spend the whole day brainstorming and thinking about a strategic plan. And then at the end of the day, when they're exhausted and they have no willpower, all of a sudden they have to make, or decision fatigue, they have to start making big decisions. So maybe, you know, wait until the next day to kind of come to closure on what was done the previous day. Setting up your environment to limit the amount of temptation that you have in it is, you know, one of the things that you can do that help preserve it. And there's a real quick list, and this list comes from a book called The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal. And she teaches a class at Stanford on this, and the book is really about the lessons learned from giving her students homework assignments and having them come back and report on things. But some things that are helpful is to focus on I want and I willpower. Most of us think of willpower or impulse control as I won't do this, I won't take that, I won't eat this or whatever. But thinking about what I really want, so that engages not the immediacy of the moment, but the future. What do I really want to have happen, and what choice would I make if that's what I want to have happen? Or I will do something rather than I won't do something. The brain is a very efficient organ, and even though it's 3 to 4% of your brain, it uses 20 to 25% of oxygen and glucose. And when your blood sugar level is low, the brain begins to shut down circuits. And one of the first things it shuts down is impulse control, because it's one of the most energy intensive circuits. So just eating 5 smaller meals a day starts to even out your glucose levels. And there's lots of other research that suggests that that is useful in other ways as well. If you can practice breathing where you get yourself down to 4 to 6 breaths per minute, and so that's, you think of that as maybe about a 7-second inhale, a 7-second exhale, and with the heartbeat in between, you're going to be right around 4 breaths per minute. If you can achieve that, it increases your heart rate variability, and there's a lot of research that says the more variable your heart rate is during the day, the healthier you are. The best way to measure that is at night. So you have to wear something to bed that will do that for you, or if you have a sleep number bed with Sleep IQ, that'll tell you what that is. But heart rate variability is also associated with your willpower reservoir. So it lets you know how much you have in the bank, if you will, or your capacity. Sleep, exercise, and eating nutritious food are all ways of dealing with making us have better impulse control. And as you can look at everything on this list, all those things require impulse control or willpower to do. So you know you're supposed to, you know, set a specific bedtime and go to bed at that time every night, and yet you might find yourself in front of the TV and, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this movie in a long time, I love it, and next thing you know, you're up later than you want. So there's a kind of a circular piece here where you have to have some willpower to do the things that you need to do in order to increase your willpower. Exercise is not on, oh yeah, exercise on this list. Exercise is also. All right, any questions, comments, or thoughts about willpower?
It's definitely interesting to learn the different components that can help you build and grow your willpower, because I feel like it's one of those things we're always, oh, use your willpower, but building your willpower is a whole other topic. So it's cool to learn that there's resources for that.
Yeah, it's in the measurement tool that I use, it measures emotional intelligence. Impulse control is one of the 15 factors that we measure. And it is thought to be the most difficult of the 15 factors to improve. So it's not easy, but I think McGonigal's The Willpower Instinct has got the most definitive usable source for that.
Yeah, and I don't know about anyone else on the call, but when you were talking about the breaths per minute, I real quick just tried it, and I'm like, wow, I didn't realize how quickly my breaths are and what that's does to my heart rate already without even noticing. A 7-second breath feels very slow to me, so definitely something to work on.
And that's something you can do when you're driving down the road, or if you're going to do a transition between one 90 to 120 minute cycle and another, just spend about 5 minutes doing some deep diaphragmatic or belly breathing. People in yoga know this, that you breathe in through the belly and the lungs expand from the bottom first, and you work your way up to the top. Most of us, especially when we're stressed, we're panting, we're topping, we're using the top half of our lungs, and we're breathing at about 20 breaths per minute. So it really is slowing things down to do 4 to 6, but it builds heart rate variability, and it builds impulse control. And it's not that hard to do, and you don't have to do it all that long. And you need to have willpower to make yourself do it.
So just from my observation about myself, I tend to have a lower willpower later the day. So is that because of stress, anxiety? Like later the day you're tired. Is that because of those factors? You also mentioned eat smaller meals can increase willpower. Is that also related to your energy level?
So yes, it's related to your energy level. I do think that stress makes it harder for us to access willpower. And remember, if it's decision fatigue, if it's closely associated with decision fatigue, by the end of the day, you probably have made lots of decisions. And so, things may be depleted. There's lots of reasons why we may be exhausted by the end of the day, and low blood sugar and inadequate hydration are a couple of those, but it includes willpower. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate these resources, because my strengths have always been in immediate response, being able to respond to an issue quickly and deal with it, kind of untangle it, deal with it. But then the longer term kind of organization and planning, so that willpower requires, has been a little more challenging, and thinking of it in terms of the positives, reframing it in a positive way and accomplishing goals is kind of helping me wrap my mind around how I can reframe it for myself to make it more manageable and less about, oh, I'm disorganized and I can't do this and this and this, and I've got, a 5-page to-do list, and I'm getting overwhelmed by that. So this is really, really helpful. Thank you.
Good. There's a whole interesting line of research. I got tapped into it by listening to Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow book, in which he basically says that we have two brains. There's the part of us that's kind of immediate, and there's the part of us that's kind of the planner. And the immediate is the one that says, in your pre-modern ancestor, you survive by, when calories were available, you eat as many of them as you can. But now, we're all surrounded by calories, and that thing that helped us survive back then doesn't serve us well. But you have a part of your brain that says, if I eat this now, I'm going to regret it later on. So I want to be healthy. I want to maintain a healthy weight. You know, just one example of you got a short-term thinking brain and a long-term thinking brain, and I will and I want engages the better part of you, the part of you that, you know, has these goals and desires for your life and that kind of thing. Right. Anybody else with a question or comment?
I wanted to say in the same line as I really hate running, like I hate it, but with the pandemic, it's been the easiest thing to kind of get out and do. And I was listening to some exercise person or whatever, and sometimes they say some platitudes that I just cannot handle. Like, no, we all don't naturally want to do this. But the person said something that I say now when it's like really, really hard, is that I don't have to do this. I get to do this. Like, I get to put one foot in front of the other. I'm still healthy enough that I get to do this. So many people don't get to do this. And it is amazing to me how that switch, I mean, I still don't like doing it, but it makes it easier and it makes it more positive. You know, I get to do this. I get to get outside of my house and I get to, you know, breathe the air even through my mask. I get to do this. And at the end, I do feel better. And that changed everything. I mean, it's still hard, but it doesn't feel like a punishment. It feels like I am actively doing this because I get to. It's a privilege. I don't know why it worked, but boy, did it work.
Well, it's a reframe, and I think you're tapping into, you know, gratitude, which, you know, is big in the research right now, and you're tapping into your thinking slow brain as opposed to your thinking fast brain. So. Anybody else? All right, so we've got one last thing I'd like you to do. On the next page in the workbook, and that would be page 15, there's a place for you to record a couple commitments. So based on all the things we've talked about, including last time, if you were involved in that one, commit yourself to doing two things differently based on what you've learned. And the reason you want to do this is there's research that says if you make a written commitment with yourself, you're more likely to keep it. Because as you write this, your brain is going to go, oh, I need to help you behave so that you don't look like, you know, you're a hypocrite. So it's called the principle of congruence. When you say something or write something, your brain wants to help you behave in alignment with that. So then drawing from the verbalization piece, letting at least one other person that you like and trust know what your two commitments are, that ratchets up accountability as well. And as people are doing that, if anybody has any other questions about any of this stuff, you know, I'm here until everybody's gone. So if you are done with your commitments and you haven't any other questions or comments, then we're pretty much done. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate the conversations you're having in chat with each other and giving each other suggestions and help. It's always good to be able to tap into those peer resources. So thanks for everybody adding that.
Chuck, it's been super great working with you, and we'd love to have you back in the future. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. But like I said, have a great day, guys.